This computer. Good evening. On behalf of the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission and the Ephrata Cloister Associates, welcome to tonight's virtual Ephrata Academy. My name is Elizabeth Berthod, and I'm the Historic Site Administrator at Ephrata Cloister. For those of you not familiar with Ephrata Cloister, this community was founded in 1732 by German immigrant Conrad Beissel and consisted of celibate members as well as married members and their families. Education was always important at Ephrata. As early as 1742, Brother Obed conducted classes for the children of the married members, and later the community constructed the Ephrata Academy, which eventually became a public school. This time I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker, Lydia Jones. Lydia is a 2018 graduate of Lycoming College, where she majored in archaeology and history. During the summer of 2017, she interned at Ephrata and accepted a position with the Ephrata Cloister Associates as a visitor services associate in May of 2018. Tonight, Lydia will be presenting a comparison of the Ephrata community and the Shakers. And with that, I will turn it over to Lydia.
Tonight I'm going to be presenting on Ephrata and the United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing, more commonly known as the Shakers, with the focus on the women of these communities. I'm first going to give a brief overview of the Ephrata community and then go into a little more depth with the Shakers while comparing them to Ephrata. Conrad Beissel, the founder of Ephrata, was born in 1691 in Eberbach, Germany. He was orphaned at a young age and traveled around Germany, coming into contact with various religious groups, though he never felt content with any of them. In 1720, Beissel left Germany for America after getting in trouble for not attending the state church. After disagreeing with the brethren in Germantown, he resettled in a deserted spot along the Cocalico Creek to become a religious hermit in 1732. However, he wasn't out here very long before he was joined by several men. A year later, in 1733, the small group was joined by two women, Anna and Maria Eicher. They built a cabin for themselves on the other side of the creek to dispel any suspicions of impropriety. Beissel created his own unique religion by taking ideas from groups he had encountered and putting them together. One idea was Saturday worship. He also thought that the return of Christ would happen soon, probably in his own lifetime. He also believed that God was both male and female. There was an angry, wrathful, jealous male aspect and a loving, nurturing, and wise female aspect. In God, these parts are balanced. And if people were created in God's image, the people had both of these parts in them, just out of balance. Men too much masculine and women too much feminine. The goal then for people on earth was to get these parts back into balance to be like God. And if they achieved this goal, they got to marry their spiritual spouse in heaven. Women married the male part represented by Christ, and men the female part, called Sophia or wisdom. And if they had that perfect heavenly spouse, then they didn't need to bother with an earthly spouse. That would be a distraction, hence celibacy. This understanding of humans differed from the rest of society at the time. Typically, men were viewed as complete, and women were defined as lacking the male aspect. While keeping that women lacked masculine elements, Beissel added that men are defined as a lack of female. Both men and women then are lacking something. This definition also makes traditional feminine qualities desirable for men and not negative. The Ephrata community consisted of both celibate sisters and brothers, and a married congregation called householders who lived on their own farms. The celibates lived in large dormitories with attached meeting houses. This building over here on the left is Bethania, the brother's house, and the two buildings on the left is the Saron, the sisters' dormitory, and the Zal, the sisters' meeting house. Mother Maria Eicher was appointed prioress of the sisterhood and was Beissel's female counterpart. She led the sisterhood for over 20 years. At the peak around 1740, there was about 300 members of Ephrata, about 40 celibate brothers, about 40 celibate sisters, about 220 married members. As Beisel grew older, the question of succession hung over the community. Beisel's chosen successor was Peter Miller, the prior of the Brotherhood. However, Mother Maria disliked Miller and instead wanted Brother Gideon. When she told Beisel her feelings on the matters, he didn't listen to her. And in response, Maria separated the sisterhood from the Brotherhood and Beisel's control. Her plot failed, though, and she was dismissed as prioress. She continued to live with the sisters in the sisters' house as a normal member with renewed penance and devotion until her death in 1784. Conrad Beisel died in 1768 at the age of 77. Peter Miller did succeed him. However, Miller wasn't the charismatic figure that Beisel was and had a difficult time attracting new members. As the celibates grew older and passed away and no new members entered, membership gradually declined. Miller died in 1796 and the last two celibates in 1813. In 1814, the married householders took over the property and established the German Seventh-day Baptist Church. They continued to live and worship at Ephrata until 1934, when the church closed. In 1945, the property was bought by the state of Pennsylvania and underwent over 20 years of restoration to restore it how it looks today. In 1736, just a few years after Beisel came to Ephrata, Anne Lee, the founder of the Shakers, was born in Manchester, England, to a poor blacksmith's family. And this panorama here shows Manchester in 1746, about 10 years after Lee's birth. In 1758, Lee joined a group known as the Wardley Society. Founded by Jane and James Wardley in 1747, this group was an offshoot of the Quakers, and like them, also practiced pacifism, rejected the sacraments and other rituals, and had no ordained clergy. During services, they spoke in tongues, rocked back and forth, sung, danced, and shook violently, hence their name, the Shaking Quakers, which eventually shortened to the Shakers. They also believed in direct divine inspiration and the imminent millennium. For the Shakers, divine inspiration was a key belief. The Bible was inadequate and required continuous inspiration to interpret and complete. Inspiration did not end with Jesus and the apostles, but instead continued to the present. Similar to Ephrata, they believed that God was androgynous, containing male and female. Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. If both men and women were created in the image of God, then God had to be both male and female. This dual God could give women a sense of importance they may not have felt in the outside world. Instead of a solely male God, a dual God gave women a divine female God to identify with and could give them a sense of importance in sharing God's gender. Shaker elder Frederick Evans discusses this, describing the Shakers as a place, quote, where woman's rights are fully recognized by first giving her a mother in deity to explain and protect them. Sophia's importance at Ephrata could have given the Ephrata sisters a similar feeling. Christ was also androgynous. The first time Christ came, the male part was manifested in Jesus. No one could be truly born again until after the manifestation of the female part of Christ, which would be the second coming, and the group eagerly awaited this imminent return. Ephrata also believed in an androgynous Christ. However, their understanding differed. Like the Shakers, Jesus was the male part of God. However, at the crucifixion, the male part was reunited with Sophia, the female part, when Jesus was pierced with a spear, creating an androgynous being. In 1762, despite her misgivings about sex, Anne Lee married Abraham Stanley, a blacksmith, at the encouragement and pressure of friends and family. The next 4 years saw her give birth to 4 children, none of whom survived childhood. To her, the deaths of her children confirmed her previously held belief in the harmfulness of sex. She also believed that their deaths were a punishment from God for not following her consciousness to remain single. She became more active in the Wardley Society after the death of her children and was jailed several times for breaking the Sabbath. During one of those jailings in 1770, Lee experienced a vision of Christ, who revealed the truth about sin. The original sin was not Eve and Adam eating the forbidden fruit. Instead, it was them having sex. When Adam and Eve were created, they were placed above nature to rule it and given a higher law. They were only to have sex for procreation and were only to have children under the guidance of God and following the rules of nature. In the natural world, procreation only occurs at certain times of the year. When they had sex to fulfill their lust, they broke the law of nature and lost their position of ruling, falling below nature, because humans are the only creatures that procreate at any time, regardless of the seasons. Sex was the cause of human suffering. Thus, celibacy was needed to purify a person and eliminate human suffering. Conrad Beissel also viewed the first sin as not Eve eating the fruit. Instead, the first sin was Adam desiring a mate after seeing male and female animals. Sophia, the female part, was removed from him to create Eve, leaving both without their intended other part. Though not exactly the same sin, both groups saw the first sin as relating to sex, not surprising for two celibate groups. Both groups' understanding of original sin also shifts the blame from women. Traditionally, the blame for original sin was placed solely on Eve, a woman, and women in general. For the Shakers and Ephrata, though, both Eve and Adam were to blame for the fall. Shaker Aldous Minnie Allen wrote about original sin in her argument for women's suffrage. Quote, "Before woman could enjoy the privileges which that Declaration of Rights granted to her as a human being, the laws of custom and public opinion had to be outgrown, with the effects of that false education that had riveted itself upon her religious nature, teaching her that as the author of evil, she must make atonement through a life of suffering." In outside society, women were blamed for sin and were seen as the author of evil. However, Ephrata and the Shakers' understanding did not blame women alone, instead making both men and women responsible. Lee also reported that Christ had manifested in her. Quote, "I feel the blood of Christ running through my soul and body. I feel him present with me, as sensibly as I feel my hands together. It isn't I that speak, it is Christ who dwells in me." In Lee's vision, the female spirit of Christ was invested in her. The second coming had occurred and would continue to gradually occur in the hearts of individual believers. Lee was not the Christ, though, but only the first person Christ manifested in, which is an important distinction. At Ephrata, though, they never identified the second coming and continued to wait. Another vision of Lee's in 1772 revealed the place that had been prepared for the Shakers in America, and they began to prepare for the journey. 2 years later, in 1774, Lee and a group of 8 followers, including her husband, brother, niece, and James Whitaker, left Liverpool for New York. And pictured here is a fragment of dress believed to have been worn by Mother Ann on her voyage to America. The group landed in New York City on August 6, 1774. Shortly after, Lee's husband Abraham left her because of her insistence on celibacy. The group struggled with little funds and were often without food. By 1776, though, they were able to purchase land in New York, which later became Watervliet. Communalism was practiced informally due to necessity, but was not required. Members still lived in individual homes with their families while practicing celibacy. 5 years after arriving, and the group had received no new converts. Mother Ann kept their spirits up, though, and promised that they would soon receive new members. Quote, "O my children, hold fast, and be not discouraged. God has not sent us into this land in vain, but he has sent us to bring the gospel to this nation, who are deeply lost in sin, and there are great numbers who will embrace it, and the time draws near." Her vision of these members soon came true. By 1780, in Lebanon, New York, about 40 miles away from Neascon, New Light Baptists learned that a nearby group, the Shakers, believed that the second coming of Christ had already begun. They'd been waiting for the second coming and were extremely interested in this news. Several scouts visited the Shakers and reported about their beliefs, which they agreed with. The Baptists admired the group's practical Christianity, including communalism and caring for the poor. Following their minister, Joseph Meacham Jr., many of these New Light Baptists confessed their sins and converted to Shakerism. These new arrivals helped to increase the group's number. A religious revival was also sweeping New York in the 1780s, and the Shakers had receptive listeners. Mother Ann spent most of her time traveling and preaching. However, she also faced opposition, was accused of being a British spy or a witch, and spent 6 months in prison in 1780 before eventually returning to New Lebanon. And on the right here is a chair that was supposedly owned by Mother Lee, and then her gravestone. Weakened from her exhausting travels, Mother Ann Lee died in 1784. James Whitaker took over leadership. However, he was not the charismatic figure that Mother Ann had been, but was able to keep the group together. Because Shaker doctrine was based on continuous divine revelation, the community could continue after the death of Lee and could change to meet changing conditions. Whitaker moved the spiritual and administrative center from Neaskum to New Lebanon, and the first meeting house was built there in 1786. He also further solidified the practice of communalism, though was still not official. He led the group for about 3 years before his death in 1787. Whitaker was the last European-born leader of the group, and leadership passed to American-born members after his death. By this point, also, most of the original European members had died. After Whitaker's death, Joseph Meacham became the leader, and pictured here is a handkerchief he supposedly owned. Mother Ann had high regard for Joseph and called him her, quote, firstborn son in America. He became father, and soon after he appointed Lucy Wright as mother. Because God was male and female, they felt that the Shaker should also be led by both a man and a woman. This decision was later said to have been divinely inspired by Mother Lee. Wright was also respected by Lee, who said, quote, we must save Lucy, for it will be equal to saving a nation. Under them, Shaker belief became formalized. A formal covenant was created that all members had to sign to display their spiritual and material commitment to the society. In 1787, they officially instituted communalism, bringing the Shakers together at New Lebanon, which would then serve as an example for future villages. Pairs of elders and elderesses then would travel to places where groups of converts were ready to start a community and help them establish the village. By 1794, 11 communities had gathered into order. Similar to Ephrata, they based their practice of communalism on the early Christian church. Acts 4:32-35, quote, and the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and of one soul. Neither said any of them that aught of the things which he possessed was his own, but they had all things common, and with great power gave the apostles witness of the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. Neither was there any among them that lacked, for as many as were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and brought the prices of the things that were sold, and laid them down at the apostles' feet. And distribution was made unto every man according as he had need. Because the Shakers adopted communalism later, scholars also suggest that sharing goods was necessary for survival. They organized the society into several orders based on commitment. This would hopefully prevent apostasy, hasty membership, and prepare new members for full commitment. These orders included a children's order and a gathering order for adults to try out Shaker life before making the commitment. After the gathering order, a junior order allowed members to work for the community but still keep their private property. They only completely gave up their property if they signed the covenant and entered into the senior orders. The organization system gradually shifted to meet circumstances. Villages added new orders based on population growth, and by 1825, most communities were organized into at least 3 orders or families, and New Lebanon, the largest village, had 8. Each family had their own dormitory, barns, workshops, and industries. Men and women shared the same dormitory but lived on opposite sides. The largest and oldest family in each village was the church family, and pictured here are some buildings of the Mount Lebanon church family. Up here in the upper left is the meeting house. Next to it, the brethren workshop. The lower left, the office and store, and then a dwelling. Each family had 2 elders and 2 elderesses in charge of spiritual well-being and general concern, 2 deacons and 2 deaconesses to handle practical concerns, including scheduling and getting things, and 4 trustees, 2 men and 2 women, to handle finances and interactions with the outside world. The church family elders and elderesses were then responsible for the entire community. The villages were then organized into bishoprics, consisting of 2 to 3 villages. They were then overseen by 2 elders and 2 elderesses of the ministry. They were then overseen by the ministry in New Lebanon, or Right Meacham, which is a much more complicated organizational system than Ephrata's, which just consisted of Faisal as superintendent, Mother Maria as the prioress, and then the prior of the brother's house, which is most likely because the Shakers had multiple villages and a larger population to oversee. Everyone was welcome to join, and they took in homeless, poor, and orphans. Parents also sent their children to be indentured or educated with the Shakers. Children were raised in the children's order, and then at age 21, they could make the decision on whether or not to leave. All Shaker members were required to be celibate, so married couples and families were split. Ephrata, on the other hand, did have a married householder population. If married people wanted to join the celibate orders, they just left spouse and children in the outside world. Ephrata was also not overly concerned with recruitment. The end times were coming, so they weren't concerned with finding new members to continue the community, unlike the Shakers who did see a future. Faisal did some traveling, which attracted people to the community, but there was never a systematic recruitment like the Shakers had. In the 1790s, worship services also became formalized. During Mother Anne's lifetime, worship services were free-form, individualistic, and chaotic. Members would often involuntarily leap, whirl, shake, and dance under the influence of the spirit. Under Meacham and Wright, though, services were given a set form. Dances had set movements and were practiced. Supposedly, Father Meacham was, quote, entirely lacking natural ability for the movements and exercises employed in worship, and he spent many hours practicing, even wearing the floorboards in his room smooth. And eventually, quote, he became endowed with such ability and grace that he seemed to exercise more like a spirit than a human being. A common dance consisted of brethren and sisters facing each other in lines, like as pictured, and stepping forwards and backwards. Another motion was raising the hands with palms up to gather blessings from the members, and then lowering the hands with palms down to dispense blessings. Visitors often came to services to see these performances. And I have a video here from Hancock Shaker Village of some reenactors doing this dance.
Come life, shaker life, come life eternal, shake, shake out me all that is carnal. Come life, shaker life, come life eternal, shake, shake out me all that is carnal. I'll take 2 steps, I'll get it. I'll show Michael twice how he did it. I'll take 2 steps, I'll get it. I'll show Michael twice how he did it.
This is very different than Ephrata singing, which I have a short audio clip here of some Ephrata singing by our course. Like Ephrata music, Shaker singing is a cappella. Quote, the best and in fact the only proper instrument is the human voice. However, Shaker sang in unison, unlike Ephrata's 4-part harmony. Shaker music is also closer in line with folk singing than Ephrata's hymns, and Shakers would sometimes sing hymn texts to folk tunes. In the early years, Shaker music was not memorized and congregational, but instead spontaneous and individual. Lee herself was known to sing in a trance-like state using an unknown language. Shakers wrote songs by singing whatever they felt in their soul or by receiving a vision. Meacham and Wright then organized the songs, and they memorized the music and sung congregationally. Both Shaker men and women could create music. At Ephrata, brothers and sisters also authored hymn text. For a long time, we believed that only Beisel or other brothers composed the hymn tunes. However, new research suggests that several sisters, namely Sister Furbin, Sister Katra, and Sister Hannah, composed music, making them the first female music composers in America. Worship services of the Shakers and Ephrata were also fairly similar, as they both allowed member participation as the Spirit led them. Both groups also separated men and women, though the Shakers had them sit on different sides of the church, while Ephrata utilized balconies. Joseph Meacham died in 1796. He appointed Lucy Wright as his successor, and did not choose a male successor as father, and Wright did not choose one. Mother Lucy remained the sole leader. The practice of appointing a single man and single woman to lead only lasted about 10 years when Meacham and Wright were father and mother. The 5 years after Meacham's death were characterized by a rebellion in two of the villages, New Lebanon and Hancock, and at least 20 young men left the society. They were unhappy with the leadership positions given to women, especially Wright, and doubted that a sect led by a woman could succeed. They equated female rule or petticoat government with the loss of manhood and freedom. New Lebanon leaders pushed back, stating, quote, "Therefore it is not man nor woman that is to govern the church, but it is Christ. And whether Christ governs us through the medium of man or woman, it is the same unction from the Holy One, and we are equally satisfied." Wright also sent 3 brethren on a missionary tour to the West, which successfully resulted in 9 communities in Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, and Western New York, for a total of 19 villages. Membership reached 2,500. Special dress also started to be instituted. At first, the Shakers wore normal clothing for the time and dressed no different from everyone else. By the early 19th century, though, they began to adopt a specific dress, which would change a little bit throughout the history. Men originally wore coats, vests, shirts, and knee breeches, common to the late 18th century. Their breeches, stockings, coats, and vests were black, and the shirt was white. They also wore wool or fur hats. The coat and vest were typically removed during work then. In the early 1800s, trousers replaced the breeches and were usually a gray or other neutral color. In the 1820s, colored smocks replaced the white shirts for work, as this was more practical. The sleeves also shortened to make work easier. Straw hats were adapted in the 1860s. The colored smocks then were eventually replaced with the white shirts again. The question of whether to have a beard or not was particularly contentious. A conference was held in 1875 to discuss the issue, and the result was a compromise. All new male members would be clean-shaven, while the older members had the option of whether to shave or not. For women from 1800 to 1810, a dress style was adopted and stayed the same until the mid-19th century. The materials, colors, and fabric patterns varied. Dresses could be any color, including red, brown, blue, green, and purple. By 1811, the sisters had stopped wearing restrictive undergarments, including corsets. Unlike secular women, the sisters were not supposed to be the slaves of fashion and were required to do hard work during the day, so they couldn't be encumbered. The first set outfit consisted of a dress with a square bodice and a skirt to hide the hips and waist, like is pictured here. A neckerchief, like the one over here, covered the shoulders and chest, and later berthas were used instead of neckerchiefs to cover the upper body. And at first, berthas were usually the same color as the dress, like the middle here, but later they favored a different color one, especially the iridescent one, like the one on the right. After age 14, women wore caps, and when working outside, bonnets. Nets, like the one over here, were worn after the 1840s. In 1855, the ministry allowed pleats for stylistic purposes. The women also began to wear crinolines or skirts underneath to achieve a fuller look. In the second half of the 19th century, rules relaxed and members were able to have more individualistic styles. Worldly trims and ornaments were also allowed, and styles were closer to secular clothing, like the maroon colored trim on the dress here and the velvet cuffs. By the 20th century, women wore dresses, skirts, and blouses similar to the secular style, though they still retained vestiges of the old style with the berthas and the bonnets. Ephrata members also wore special outfits. However, men and women wore the same clothing as a way to help restore the balance between male and female. Both groups' clothing was modest and would help the members concentrate on their spirit, not the body. The different dress could also help to distinguish members from the rest of society. Outfits worn by average members and leaders were also the same, which could help prevent a hierarchy. Mother Lucy Wright died in 1821. Shaker Society no longer had a single leader. Instead, a group of elder and elderesses led. The organizational system that was established by Wright and Meacham continued, with the 2 elders and 2 elderesses of the New Lebanon ministry having the highest authority. After Wright's death, the ministry also wrote the Millennial Laws, which codified all the beliefs, rules, and regulations of the society. They were revised and expanded multiple times. For Shakers, work was divided along traditional gender lines. Men cared for the livestock, worked on farms. They also worked at various trades, including constructing buildings, tinsmithing, woodworking, butchering, blacksmithing, tanning, and making their famous furniture. The sisters did domestic tasks, including cleaning, gardening, laundering, preserving, and working with textiles. Kitchen duty was rotated every 4 weeks. They also sold some of their products in the outside world, including furniture, clothing, medicinal herbs, and seeds. They were well known for the quality of their work. Charles Dickens, who disliked pretty much everything about the Shakers, did admire them for their quality of work, writing, quote, "They are good farmers, and all their produce is eagerly purchased and highly esteemed. Shaker seeds, Shaker herbs, and Shaker distilled water are commonly announced for sale in the shops of towns and cities." As time went on, especially post-1860s, gender divisions lessened because of the declining number of men and women worked in the traditional male jobs. Pictured here is, on the right, is Sarah Collins, who's filling chair orders in the 1910s and 30s. And down here is a sister working in the furniture shop in 1940. Beissel's emphasis at Ephrata on a balance between male and female aspects meant a more equal distribution of tasks. Both men and women did domestic chores, including cooking, sewing, cleaning, and laundry for their separate dormitories. Thus, the brothers did some of the household tasks usually required of women. The sisters tended to the animals and the gardens, while the men worked in the fields and in the print shop. Shaker Society reached its peak between 1820 and 1860. About 6,000 members lived in 19 different villages. For the most part, Shakers did not have dietary restrictions and ate 3 meals a day. They ate chicken, fish, bread, vegetables, fruits, and desserts. In 1869, 2 sisters at Watervliet recorded their baking for a month. Quote, "Made pies the first week, 166. Next, 152. Next, 163. Next, 139. Total, 620. A visitor to Hancock in 1886 had a lunch of cold beef, white bread, brown bread, butter, boiled rice, baked beans, blackberry jam, blackberry pie, potato cake, apple pie, milk, pickles, cream cheese, cottage cheese, cake, and donuts for a bill of 25 cents. However, during the 1820s and 1830s, members debated dietary restrictions, specifically Grahamism. Reverend Sylvester Graham advocated refraining from eating meat and drinking alcohol because they would corrupt the body and soul and cause sexual thoughts and behavior. A vegetarian diet, including water and bread, would have kept an individual pure. He also advocated avoiding warm baths, having a rigorous lifestyle, and sleeping on hard beds. He probably would have approved of Ephrata's sleeping arrangements. Younger members in particular wanted to adopt Grahamism. In 1841, Shaker leaders received spiritual direction to require the abstention of members from tea, coffee, and pork. Whether to refrain from all meat was left up to the individual member because vegetarianism was so controversial and no consensus could be reached. However, about 14 years later, this rule was rescinded against the wishes of some. Food appeared to be a very passionate subject for the members, maybe because it was the one area where they were allowed a little luxury. At Ephrata, though, members had a vegetarian diet. Beisel thought the food a person ate affected their personality and spirituality. Meat was considered a luxury and had carnal, animalistic properties, not something wanted in a celibate community. The members primarily ate fruits, vegetables, and bread. And when he visited Ephrata, Israel Cralius records about his dinner. Quote, "The courses were peeled barley boiled in milk, with bread broken into it. Another course was pumpkin mush, with slices of soft-crusted bread on a plate. Between these was butter, but only for me, as the brethren for themselves had a kind of cheese curds on platters all around the table." Ephrata members, though, had a special opportunity to eat meat, especially lamb, during love feasts. They usually ate only one main meal a day at 6 o'clock at night. The snacks may have been eaten during the day, during prayer breaks at 10 and noon. This cutting back of food would help them prepare for heaven, where food was not needed, and to start to de-emphasize earthly desires. Both Ephrata and the Shakers believed that not eating meat would help the members not have lustful thoughts and actions. The longevity and actual restrictions differed, though. Descriptions about meal times are also very similar. Both groups ate in silence. Shaker men and women, though, ate together at different tables, like is pictured here, while Ephrata brothers and sisters ate separately in their own dormitories. By the mid-1830s, Shaker members felt that their society was in decline and in a state of crisis. During previous times of trouble, strange behavior, visions, and a sense of religious excitement had strengthened their faith, and they hoped that such spiritual intervention and blessing would occur then. In 1837, during a worship meeting at Watervliet, New York, a group of young 10 to 12-year-old girls experienced strange behavior, including shaking, spinning, becoming unaware, falling to the ground, singing unknown songs, and having visions of dead members, including Mother Ann. Within a year, most of the Eastern Shaker communities had members that exhibited similar strange behavior. The Shakers experienced a range of actions associated with this revival, from feelings of faith strengthening to the extreme actions, including turning, bowing, bending, reeling, falling to the floor and lying still, sometimes for days, sudden resuscitation, dancing, singing strange songs, speaking with a voice or personality not their own, speaking a pseudo-language or in tongues, temporary blindness, contortion, and unnatural strength. Leaders and members alike embraced this revival as a sign of divine blessing from Mother Ann. Hence, this era became known as Mother Ann's work, or the era of manifestations. Mediums, usually young women, received spirit communications from dead Shakers, including Mother Ann and Mother Lucy. Sometimes they were presented a vision, often of the spirit land, or were given a message. Messages could either be personal messages of encouragement and comfort to individual members, or they could be moral exhortations for the entire group. They would then record their experiences to tell the group what they had received, possibly in writing, like the two pictured here, or in drawings like these. These so-called gift drawings were produced by mediums and were gifts from the spirit to the artists in the community. About 200 of these gift drawings survive, most having been produced by women from Hancock or New Lebanon. Many Shaker artists also wrote about their drawings to provide interpretation and clarification, possibly because they did not trust the images to be interpreted correctly without. And this here is probably the most famous example. It's the Tree of Life, done in 1854 by Hannah Cohone of Hancock. And unlike most, she did sign her name. Shakers usually did not approve of art. The Millennial Laws of 1845 state, quote, "No maps, charts, no pictures or paintings shall ever be hung up in your dwelling rooms." However, art was created during the era of manifestation because of its religious nature. Art was also done by the Sisters of Ephrata. At Ephrata, sisters copied the intricate musical notation in the writing school to create music manuscript books like the four pictured here. Though the brothers did some of this copying, the majority was done by the sisterhood. In addition to the music manuscripts, they also created large posters of biblical verses or Bible sayings. The creation was a religious exercise, as they were to be meditating while they did the writing. The finished products were then hung on the walls to remind them to keep their faith, but could also act a little like wallpaper and provide some decoration. For both communities, women created the majority of artistic works, though they usually did not sign their artwork. The creation of this art was for religious purposes and not aesthetics. Spirit communications could take place at random times and places, but most occurred during worship meetings. Worship services also returned to the more chaotic, spirit-led services that characterized Mother Anne's time. Eventually, though, visionaries began to challenge the leaders and their rules, and leaders responded by trying to control the messages by requiring them to be approved before being told to the group. Also, while most early visions had come from dead Shaker leaders, beginning in 1841, visions started to come from extraordinary figures, including Jesus, Mary Magdalene, St. Paul, Christopher Columbus, George Washington, Napoleon, Queen Isabella, Queen Elizabeth, and martyred saints. And these visions reduced the messages to absurdity. By 1860, the era of manifestations was coming to a close. The leaders were embarrassed by the actions of the mediums and members, especially the excessive emotionality and irrationality displayed. They tried to distance themselves from the events and return to more traditional Shaker values. Membership started to gradually decline after the 1860s. At the beginning, the community had struggled, and the hardships had forged strong bonds between the members. However, the society had become prosperous, and the members are not as dependent on each other. Also, some appear to have joined for the sole reason of benefiting economically, not for religious reasons. Many children who had been raised by the Shakers also decided to leave and not become full members, resulting in anger that they took resources and benefited without giving back. However, they had been brought as children by their parents and other adults and had not made the decision to enter the society on their own. Tensions between older and younger members arose, and apostasy rates were high. And as the population declined, villages started to close. In 1875, Tyringham, Massachusetts, which is pictured here, became the first village to close. In the mid-1800s and early 1900s, some Shakers also became involved in outside politics. While usually reluctant to get involved in outside matters, some of the members felt that their religious beliefs necessitated getting involved in politics and social justice. Members, particularly women, advocated for animal rights, the abolition of slavery, and women's suffrage, though older, more conservative members pushed back against this involvement. And pictured here are 4 Shakers of the North family at Mount Lebanon that were involved with the suffrage cause. Over on the far left here is Eldress Antoinette Doolittle, and next to her is her co-eldress Anna White. In the middle is Elder Frederick Evans, and to the far right is Eldress Minnie Catherine Allen, who was raised by Eldress Anna White. The Shakers' main argument for women's suffrage was the dual nature of God. If God is both male and female, then men and women are equal and deserve equal rights. Eldress Allen wrote about the belief in a solely male God, led to the male domination in religion and government. Once society realizes the truth that God is both male and female, women would gain equality. Quote, "No matter how intelligent or virtuous, her voice must yet be silent, and we blush, yea, burn with indignation, when we realize the shameful servitude to which man's laws subjects her in social relations, where she has no legal claim to her own person, property, or children. First, who planned the Constitution and its laws? Men. Who have been its executors from first to last in Senate and in House? Men. They have framed all our laws, have mended and amended them as they have thought proper, and what wonder? For ages back, they have exercised sole authority in all offices of church, quite unmindful of the fact that God had said, "Let us create man in our own image, male and female created he them," and also that every atom of the universe, from mineral or to burns and is controlled by dual forces. The history of ages past has taught us that the theology of a people bears the most potent influence in the framing of civil government. Therefore, we are confident that when that grand central truth becomes more widely taught and appreciated, that God is dual, that in him, as an all-wise Father and loving Mother, we have full parentage, then this very natural and beautiful concept of deity will find reflex in our government, remodeling its laws and customs in harmony therewith. Then shall women be recognized as a co-equal and necessary helper of man in all the relations of life. They also saw the denial of female suffrage as the root of evil in society. Once women were able to vote and contribute to government, societal problems, including poverty, intemperance, labor abuse, and inequality would disappear. Quote, "When woman helps to frame the laws by which she is governed, the blackened waters of sensuality and intemperance will give place to the crystal river of purity and peace, which shall roll as a cleansing tide throughout all the avenues of society. We feel confidence in saying that the woman question is the one which, at the present time, comprehends all others, and should be urged and pressed with the concentrated efforts of all reformers." They used Shaker publications to advance their causes, and some of their articles also found circulation in secular papers. Elder Evans, Elders Doolittle, and the North family took over the printing of the Shaker newspaper called Shaker. They renamed the paper Shaker and Shakeress, reflecting their belief in equality between men and women. Doolittle contributed to the paper and ran a department for submissions of articles by female Shakers or any sympathetic woman. Evans and Doolittle used the paper to present their message of reform in diet, health, government, temperance, land ownership, working conditions, and women's rights. However, their leadership of the paper did not last long because of the pushback of more conservative members. When asked to moderate their views, they refused. If they couldn't print their views, they didn't want to be involved. In 1888, Elder Frederick Evans wrote a letter to the New York Tribune in response to their refusal to support women's suffrage. He proposed a complete restructuring of government with an all-male House of Representatives, an all-female Senate, and then a man and a woman president. They also involved themselves with outside political organizations. Elders White was a member of the National American Women's Suffrage Association and the vice president of a local branch of the National Council of Women. Elders Allen attended the meeting of the International Council of Women in Toledo, Ohio. She also led a petition drive in support of women's suffrage, and both Shaker men and women took time out of their workday to sign it. Elders Doolittle, Elder Evans, and other members of the North family went on missionary tours, speaking in Protestant churches, big city lecture halls, and meetings of reform-minded individuals about women's suffrage. And on the back of this picture of Doolittle and White is a newspaper article which reads, quote, "Elders Antoinette Doolittle, a pleasant-faced elderly lady, then made a brief address. She traced the various events which mark America as destined for the development of humanity at its highest condition, and spoke eloquently in favor of women's right to the franchise, saying that if the ship of state was not fit for females, the best course would be to cleanse and fumigate it. Elders Doolittle was listened to with deep interest and was frequently interrupted by applause." Though Elders Doolittle, Elder Evans, and Elderess White would die before the passage of the 19th Amendment, Elders Minnie Allen would see women granted the right to vote in 1920, before her death a year later in 1921. In 1957, the Shaker membership book closed. However, after its closing, some young members started to practice at Sabbath Day Lake. There is debate on whether to classify these new members as actual members. Other Shakers at the time did not accept their membership because they did not sign the book and membership was closed. However, the Sabbath-day Lake Shakers obviously consider themselves Shakers, saying that anyone who follows the beliefs and lifestyle is a Shaker. In 2017, Francis Carr of Sabbath-day Lake, pictured here, died. 2 to 3 members remain. Pictured here is Sister Frances, Brother Arnold Hadd, and Sister June Carpenter, and their newsletter also refers to a Brother Andrew. And they report that they receive inquiries about joining every week. Ephrata and the Shakers' unique theologies allowed for the advancement of women, though neither group believed in complete equality on earth, nor achieved it in practice. Though equality was not seen as a goal for earth, it would be achieved in heaven. And even if the theory was not fully realized, compared to outside society, the women in both communities were given more equality and opportunities. Both Beisel and Mother Ann had reservations concerning female leadership, though despite their views, both communities had female leaders, Mother Ann and Mother Lucy of the Shakers, and Mother Maria Eicher of Ephrata. These women were the most powerful women in their communities and even outranked some men. They appeared to be very competent leaders and helped the communities run smoothly. The idea of having a balanced leadership of a man and a woman was also found in both societies, as Wright led with Joseph Meacham and Mother Maria with Beisel, though Maria had to defer to Beisel as evidenced by her desires for his succession and her removal as prioress. And unlike at Ephrata, Mother Lucy Wright took over after her male counterpart died. Both groups believed that women were spiritually capable and important. Divine inspiration could come to anyone, regardless of gender. They were able to participate in worship services and produce works of art and song about their religious experiences. Both communities also gave women companionship with like-minded women. They were able to devote themselves to religion without the distraction of caring for a house and family. Ephrata and the Shakers offered women an alternate to the traditional roles of wife and mother. While religion was likely the reason for individuals joining Ephrata or the Shakers, the degree of equality and the opportunities were probably welcome bonuses. Ephrata and the Shakers share some interesting similarities, and there may be a reason for that. During the 1500s, French Protestants, also known as Huguenots, faced intense persecution by the Catholic rulers of France. Signed in 1598 by King Henry IV, the Edict of Nantes granted them equality, civil rights, and toleration, though the Catholic Church remained the official church. In 1685, the Edict of Fontainebleau, signed by Louis XIV, revoked the Edict of Nantes, declaring Protestantism illegal in France. Persecution of the Huguenots increased, and many fled to more tolerant neighboring communities. A small group of these Huguenots believed that they were divinely inspired and predicted the imminent millennium. Their worship services also included singing, dancing, and speaking in tongues. Called the French prophets, they were forced to leave France, and some traveled to the Manchester area, where they influenced several groups, including Jane Leeds Philadelphians, the Quaker movement, and the Worldly Society of Mother Ann. In addition to traveling to Manchester, some also went to Germany to spread their message. They influenced 2 men, Eberhard Ludwig Gruber and Johann Friedrich Rock, who formed the Community of True Inspiration in 1714, which eventually moved to Iowa and became the Amana Society, which is pictured here. Their main belief was that God communicated to people through divinely inspired instruments, or Werkzeuge, a belief they adopted from the French prophets. They were also concerned with distinguishing between true inspiration from God and false inspiration from Satan. In 1715, Conrad Beisel of Ephrata went to stay with the baker Jacob Schantz, who was associated with the community in Germany and was holding meetings in his house. Beisel joined them for about a year before leaving. Thus, Ephrata and the Shakers share a religious ancestor in the French prophets, which may help to explain some of their similarities. Ephrata and the Shakers had a lot of similarities, including their belief in celibacy, an androgynous God/Christ, and a simple life, but also some important differences, including their view on the second coming, art, music, and diet. Both groups also translated their belief in a dual God into a sense of equality for women, though neither gave complete equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia. That was very interesting. For more information on Ephrata Cloister or to find out about more recordings of past virtual academies, please visit our website at www.ephratacloister.org. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you in October.